Hi, welcome back to Mr. Menta's ELL Classroom. This video is continuing our playlist on Chapter 9 of the Blue Book, studying the simple present tense. To complete this video, you will need just this page, page 82 from the textbook, which I have included in the description of this video. You do not need to print this page. Just have it so you can read it on your computer or your tablet. You will need a sheet of notebook paper and a pen and pencil. Okay, let's get started. So, this is another one of those pages that we used to do as a speaking exercise back when we had big classrooms, but now we're going to do more as a writing exercise because you have to be able to do it at home. So, we're starting with blue boxes at the top. Let's see what the title of this is called. Talk about it. Where do they live? And what do they do? So this exercise is putting together the stuff we did in a lot of the previous exercises. Okay? So we have another blue box showing the grammar rules that we're going to be using in this. And you'll notice these are things that we had in blue boxes before on the other pages, but now they're together in one box because we have to remember them. So I live, we live, you live, they live, he lives, she lives, it lives. So again, this is the lesson we're driving home. When do we have this S and when do we not have the S? And live is just our example verb. This rule is true for any verb. So whether we're talking about whether someone speaks or reads or eats, all of those words are going to need that S some of the time. And then they're going to need no S some of the time. And I want to make sure you always know which time is which. So, here is our example for the questions. Where do I live? Where do we live? Where do you live? Where do they live? Okay? So, again, this group of words, I, we, you, they, follow one set of rules for do. Then where does he live? So if we change I to he, we have to change do to does. Get that? Get what we're saying here? Where does he live? Where does she live? Where does it live? What do I do? What do we do? What do you do? What do they do? So again, I, we, you, and they follow the same rule. We'd say do in the question. What does he do? So we have he, she, and it. It changes again. What does she do? What does it do? Okay? Think we got that? This is going over stuff we've already talked about a little bit. Now we just need to remember all the different pieces at the same time. So, on this page, we've got a list of people who are going to tell you about themselves. My name is Linda. I live in London. I work in a library. Okay? We've got all of these people that we can talk about. And if we had a group full of students, or if I was there with you live, we could talk about each person one by one and ask questions about each person one by one. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus more on writing about them today because most of us need to be able to do this alone at home. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these questions down here at the bottom as a guide for how to talk about the people in the pictures. So over here it says, where does Linda live? So Linda. So again, let's look up here. So you remember this one. Linda. This is Linda. So where does Linda live? Well, look here. She says, my name is Linda. I live in London. London. Okay? So the answer, she lives in London. What does she do? Going back up here. Again, Linda. I work in a library. That's what Linda says she does. So the answer would be, She works, remember the S, she works in a library. Okay? So we have 4 sentences, 2 questions and 2 answers about Linda. Now over here, there's another example. If we're talking about 2 people, remember, because of the grammar rules, it's going to get a little different. Where do Walter and Wendy live? Well, let's go back up here and find Walter and Wendy. Where are Walter and Wendy? There they are. Walter and Wendy. We are Walter and Wendy. That's these 2 people. Where do Walter and Wendy live? We live in Washington, D.C. Okay? So we're going to go back down here. We live in, they live in Washington, D.C. What do they do? We work in an office. So we would write, they work in an office. Okay? So your assignment for here is to write, just like these boxes, for every picture on here. Okay? That should be 9 boxes. Okay? So, first, I want you to write, on your sheet of notebook paper, write, where does Linda live? And then write the answer. She lives in London. What does Linda do? She works in a library. Write those 4 sentences. Okay? Then move on to do that for Brian. Okay? Write all of those for Brian. This will be number 2. So write number 2 for Brian. Where does Brian live? Okay? Then answer it. What does Brian do? Okay? So it should be 4 sentences, 2 questions, 2 answers for each person on here. And they should all look pretty much like these examples. Okay? Are we clear on what we're doing? Okay. Good. So pause the video now and write those examples down on your sheet of notebook paper. When you're done writing, unpause it, and I will come back and go over it and tell you what you should have written. And you'll just listen to me and pay attention and see if they match. Okay? All right. So pause the video now and write down your answers. Okay. Did you pause your video? All right. So I already did Linda together with you. So let's go over, starting with Brian. Where does Brian live? He lives in Boston. I hope you wrote L-I-V-E-S for lives. What does Brian do? He works in a bank. Walter and Wendy, they already gave us the example, but we'll go over them anyway. So, where do Walter and Wendy live? They live in Washington, D.C. And notice, no S here. It's not they lives, it's they live. Because we're talking about they. Not he or she, they. They live. So I hope you got that. This time, no S. That's what we're practicing. Okay? What do they do? They work in an office. And again, this time it should say work. Not works, work. Because we would only add that S for works if we were talking about he, she, or it. Okay. What's his name? His name, not his name, sorry. Where does Bob live? That's it. Where does Bob live? He lives in Buffalo. Lives, with the S, in Buffalo. What does he do? He drives, with an S, drives a bus. Okay. Next, where do Howard and Henry live? They live in Honolulu. Again, this time, no S, because we're talking about they. They live in Honolulu. No S. What do? They paint houses. Again, paint. No S. They paint houses. Where does Tina live? She lives in Tampa. So again, the S is back, because we're talking about she again. She lives in Tampa. What does she do? She drives a taxi. Again, drives with an S. Next. Where do Carol and Ray live? They live in Cleveland. Also, by the way, make sure in your question that you wrote where do they live, not where does. We would write does for he, she, or it. But for this, you should write where do they live. So look carefully at what you wrote. Did you write do or did you write does? Where do Carol and Ray live? They live in Cleveland. Again, no S, because we're talking about they. They live in Cleveland. What do they do? They cook in a restaurant. Again, they cook. No S. It's not cooks. It's cook. All right, next. Where does Susan live? Again, we're back to does. Where does Susan live? Because now we're talking about a she. Okay? So make sure you wrote does. Where does Susan live? She lives in San Diego. What does she do? She sells cars. Last. Okay? Where does Victor live? So again, does Victor live? He lives, we have the S again, lives in Vancouver. What does he do? He plays the violin. Okay. Good. Good. All right. That is the end of this lesson. I will see you for the next one. Good work.